Hello, I am Archibald Gordon and welcome to Let's Talk Goals. Here we talk about how we can make Jamaica the place of choice, best place really, to live, work, raise families, and do business by achieving 17 big goals. We call them the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs for short. And throughout the program, you're going to be hearing us mention different SDGs, SDG 1, SDG 2, straight through to number 17. So now these goals aim to make the world a better place by 2030. This is the deadline put in place by the United Nations. And it's pretty simple. It's that everyone everywhere should live a good life without harming the planet. When we say without harming the planet, that's what we mean by sustainable when we say the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, as I have said throughout this series, a national plan, which is what the SDGs are about, is a plan for every national, meaning a plan for every person, a plan for you, a plan for me. It means that since we're the ones who live in our homes and we're the ones who live in our communities, we are the ones who have to act. It's about partnership, not one person being in charge and the other person following, but partnership, all of us working together. And so today I want to talk to one of the key partners on this project, which is the Ministry of National Security. They're also aligned to the SDGs. And we have from the ministry, Mr. Cowan. He is Director of Strategic Planning and Performance Management at the ministry. And he essentially works on planning and managing strategies to keep Jamaica safe, which is essential for achieving sustainable development goals. His work supports important goals like promoting peace and justice, which are key to building a better future. So first, welcome to the program, Mr. Cowan, and let's get straight into it by talking a little bit about what we mean when we say strategic planning, because we said this is all about planning. So strategic planning, like really about setting long-term goals and figuring out the best way to achieve them. So with performance management now would be like what?
So strategic planning, as you rightly says, it creates, we understand that we have somewhere we need to go, but we don't have unlimited resources, Archibald. So strategic planning helps us to prioritize what strategies we'll pursue and how we'll allocate those scarce resources. And three critical resources: time, talent, money. These are critical resources we must figure out how we'll allocate so that we can deliver now what we look forward to, which is public value. We want the public to benefit from the services we provide. And then performance management is simply tracking and testing the strategies over time to make sure we're on course. And perhaps we may have started a strategy, and performance management will help us realize that that may not be the best strategy. So they work hand in hand, helping each other to make sure that the outcomes we envisage and the places we want to get to will actually get there.
So I love that, the outcome we envisage and the place we want to get to. So it's essentially kind of like taking a big trip. First, yes, you have to decide where you want to go, which is your goal.
Absolutely.
What route you're going to take, what are you going to need, and
Absolutely.
how you're going to be able to get there. And performance management now is throughout the trip, checking how long, as the person says, are we there yet?
Yes.
Are we there yet?
Yes.
And adjusting, checking, do we have enough gas, do we have to stop, etc.
That's it.
In terms of that. So in that kind of context, the Ministry of National Security, you focus on particular SDG goals,
yes,
Sustainable Development Goals. Let's talk about perhaps the most important goal for you, SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. What does that mean from the perspective of the ministry?
Yes. So peace, justice, and strong institutions. If you would permit me, I have to share the alignment with you. The story of performance for the ministry is that we have coordinated our strategies so that we can meet the national development goal of a Jamaican society that is secure, cohesive, and just. And in so doing, we have a raft of strategies that helps to meet the needs of the vulnerable, modernize law enforcement, modernize defense. And based on how those strategies are structured, they are also inextricably linked with the idea of peace, justice, and strong institutions. When you drill down a little into that SDG, you'll find where we're speaking about law enforcement and modernizing law enforcement, ending exploitation, reducing crime, reducing bribery and corruption. When we strengthen our institutions at the ministry level and at the national level, we ultimately meet the development, the Sustainable Development Goal 16.
So I hear you saying there, or well, let me say it in my own words to make sure that I'm on the same page, that before you even get to the SDGs, you're just trying to ensure that as a ministry, you're planning in line with what is needed nationally, first of all.
Absolutely. And the SDGs respect what nations are trying to do, because again, the UN has agreed as an international body that this is the direction we'll go into. And so it doesn't foist or mandate ministries to operate in a specific direction, but as the government pursues its strategies, it's done in respect of the SDGs.
Now, do you say peace, justice, and strong institutions? So this is about peaceful and inclusive societies, ensures access to justice for all, and builds effective, accountable institutions. For people at home, I imagine this is kind of more like a sort of a neighborhood with a strong community watch, where everyone, feels safe and all disputes are resolved in a particular kind of way.
Yes, yes.
Now, in relation to, that's not the only SDG that you the ministry plans around. You also have SDG 10, which is reduced inequalities. This goal aims to reduce inequality within and among countries, and well, within as in the country itself, and among countries as in between this country and another country. How does that relate to national security?
So specifically to inequalities, Archibald, at the national level, we have to look at the issue of vulnerability. We have some communities in our country that we consider to be volatile, and we consider them to be vulnerable as well. These are the communities that often lack the basic services, social services, that make them viable and active participants in the national development of the country. And so you'll find that these communities are often predisposed to issues of crime and violence. And so in reducing inequalities, we have to meet these vulnerable communities where they are and implement strategies that will reduce the level of vulnerability, which is where we'll have some critical strategies come into play, like our citizen security plan, which is aimed at reducing vulnerability and building community resilience. In that way, we have quote-unquote volatile communities becoming more active participants in the development of the country and reducing vulnerability and ultimately reducing their exposure to crime and violence.
Let's tease out that idea of a vulnerability a little bit more. When you say a vulnerability, what do you mean?
Yes, so
as one example, for instance.
Just a critical example, access to school. Access to parenting services, because sometimes we'll find within these communities you may not have the best skill sets for raising up children, as it were. And health services as well. These are sometimes communities that don't have access to proper health facilities.
How would that contribute to affect national security?
Oh, absolutely, because what we find is that when persons feel a sense of I would say, isolation from where the country is going, there's somewhat a skepticism of authority, and that skepticism of authority creates a kind of resistance against law and order. So there are other issues that come into play, but from a national security point of view, when persons feel vulnerable, they do feel as though the nation does not prioritize them, and so there comes now the issue of crime and violence as a helping hand to fit the gap that perhaps exists. And so we have to plug that gap as best as possible.
When I hear you say that, especially because when I think back of the SDG before, which talks about SDG 16, which speaks about peace, justice, and strong institutions, and I hear you express the idea in this way, it kind of also sounds like what the Ministry of Justice is saying, that regardless of where you are from, etc., you need to be able to have a certain level of access to justice systems, yes. And the same would apply for national security.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would also say, Archibald, that the strategy to reduce vulnerability is multi-sectoral. So while the ministry is at the head of the strategy, the Ministry of Justice is a part, the Ministry of Health is a part, the Ministry of Education is a part. So it's a multi-sectoral approach to reducing inequalities, because a lot of these inequalities exist in subjects that are not national security specific. So we have to lead the charge to make sure that the services get to the vulnerable.
So you're working with the ministry then. So it's not just a question of ensuring that, for instance, from the Ministry of Justice's perspective, it might be a question of ensuring ensuring that they have access to courts.
Yes.
You know, that the courts sit in certain kinds of spaces. But the courts and people's use of the courts also sort of hinges on national security. You may
Yes.
have, you know, been the subject of a crime. You may have taken part in a crime. And so those services also need to be equitable in the same kind of way, as I understand it.
Absolutely. And then after, I just have to add, Archibald, that perhaps you come in conflict with the court, with the law, and you have a court matter that has been dissolved. We come at the end as well, because the ministry has the responsibility for offender management and juvenile correction. So we have to make sure that they also have access to the social services that will be needful to rehabilitate and reintegrate them into the society.
So ministers have to talk to each other. The ministries have to talk to each other.
Absolutely.
How does that take place? When you say a multi-sectoral approach,
Yes.
are you planning together? How do you achieve that to ensure that those things all add up? Because I'm hearing the cohesion, but
Yes.
how does the cohesion take place?
Oh, well, absolutely. So I'll be generous with my response on this one. So we have what we call a CSBG, a Citizen Security Business Group. And this is a group of permanent secretaries in ministries and different key stakeholders within our citizen security plan that meet. And what we do is we review the data on the needs of particular volatile communities. And it is at the CSBG we agree on strategies that will be implemented to help the vulnerable within these communities. And at the CSBG as well, we monitor to see if the implementation is working, the performance management coming in, and if the strategy...
This is what I see. These are the numbers. These are what the numbers are telling us.
Absolutely. And then we also reassess to see if the level of vulnerability has shifted and changed. And I can say in the last year, we have seen a reduction in the level of risk to violence. That's how we measure vulnerability. 22% of our case managed individuals have seen a reduction. So we're trending in the right direction.
So one of the ministries, one of the SDG goals that you mentioned there, or rather the ministries that you mentioned, important collaborator, Ministry of Health. And you say one of the goals which are important there is SDG Goal 3, which is good health and well-being. Now I hear you talk about, the multi-sectoral approach, but it's hard to imagine, I hear it, but it's hard to imagine how something like healthcare connects with national security.
Yes.
Wow, what am I missing?
Well, I mean, you can think about psychosocial support for persons who have trauma of different kinds and may need to get professional support. We have it at the Ministry of Education through the CPFSA, but we also...
So for instance, that would be an instance, for instance, if like, a member of your family has been killed, has been subject, it would affect you.
It would
and they need
affect
to have
you.
particular kind of services.
And yes, and you may need clinical medical intervention that may be beyond the remit of what the CPFSA can provide, or like the victim services support unit. So Ministry of Health is critical in just that way as an example, but they offer a raft of other services throughout the course of the interventions.
What are some of the other health and well-being things that impact on national security?
Well, when we think about some of the, I would want to say that we can't identify a health issue per se, because it has to come as an amalgam of the amalgam of absence of these services give rise to these things. So I couldn't say another specific health issue leads to crime.
Okay, but one thing you'd have to do, for instance, you would need to be able to secure hospitals and clinics. You want to ensure that those are safe places, for instance.
Absolutely.
So those are the major goals on which you are focused in terms of the plans. But then the ministry's work also impacts all of the other goals. Before I move on to talk about your specific programs, I want to highlight, for instance, SDG Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. So you want a business district that's operating in a certain kind of way. How does that explain? So,
well, when we think about economic security, that's a completely, that's a concept in and of itself that is a big part of what the ministry does, because we do have modalities in place to treat with financial crimes, though the Ministry of Finance is particularly responsible for that area. But we have agencies like MOCA, the JCF, who have their feet in financial crimes. But then when we think about security of certain business districts, it's absolutely important sometimes to maintain a presence within those spaces. And so the ministry prioritizes the support that is given to business districts as well. I suppose it's difficult to prioritize any one thing, but we do give considerable support to making sure that the economic side of our development is protected.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the programs that you have. So that's how you do the planning
Yes.
and the performance management of these goals, and how you also have alignment, not just within the ministry, but across ministries as well. So that's the big plan that we have. We're planning together, we are measuring together, we're monitoring together to ensure that you can adjust the plan as you go along, as with any trip.
Yes,
because the road might block, you might have to go somewhere else.
Yes, that's
when
it.
we talk about the ministry now and in relation to the very specific plans that you have, one of those programs is the citizen security plan, and you mentioned that before. Really kind of like a big plan to make neighborhoods with lots of crime safer by having more police around and doing community projects, in essence. Am I characterizing it well?
Yes, I can say it's a good way to look at it. It's a broad concept that we try to build. We try to break down into 3 areas: clear, hold, and build. Mm-hmm. We want to clear the communities of elements that would predispose them to crime and violence. We want to detain those elements, and then we want
elements,
to build
people or also things?
People and things.
Okay.
Because we can have edifices, or we can have structures within a community that are counterproductive, as it were.
So if for instance a community is not, you want to secure it, so you want it to be a good vision. If you're a police officer, you want to be able to move through it clearly,
exactly.
to drive vehicles into it, for instance, and those kinds. So it could be clear. Then you say hold.
Hold.
Meaning?
So that is particularly detaining individuals who would, as it were, be actors in the community that negatively impact the community.
And build.
And then build is where now, in the absence of these elements and these structures that predisposes a community to crime and violence, we now build positive structures within the community. So this is where we'll have the targeted approaches of providing health services, educational services, social services. A lot of our communities, we do drives to give persons passports, TRN, so on. And then we have internship opportunities that are often afforded. So once we have cleared, we have held, then we start to build a positive environment.
And then this build part now, it's not by coincidence that the build part sounds like sustainability.
Excellent.
Because over the long term, you want to ensure that the community can sustain itself. You can't spend all your time in a community, especially when one considers the size of the police force in relation to the size of the population. You want communities to be able to operate in a certain kind of way. So that is one program. Another program is Jamaica Eye.
Yes. So Jamaica Eye is one of our flagship, I would want to say, major technology programs, where we install not only CCTV cameras, but monitoring centers to make sure that we keep abreast of what's happening within a space. So far, over the last 5 years, we've installed about 900 cameras. We have another 200 coming in this financial year, and we have networks across the island. The Jamaica Eye program has been very successful. Right? We've seen how it has added value to the investigative capacity of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and it's something that we want to leverage going forward.
So there's also the Live Good campaign.
Oh, well, can I say that this one is dear to my heart? I think Live Good should encapsulate what it means to be a Jamaican. We live good, right? And so it's our flagship anti-violence campaign. And it's that ethic that we would want all Jamaicans to embody. And so each member of staff at the Ministry of National Security is a Live Good ambassador. And so we want to continue this vein of making Live Good ambassadors across the island, Archibald. And it's one of the things that we wanted to discuss today and to share with you our Live Good. Let's our Live Good activity book. It's an activity book that we have designed for children between the ages of 3 and 9 to just get an idea of the concept and it allows them to be afforded the opportunity to engage this concept of live good at a very early age.
What are you doing in the campaign? How is it?
So we do a lot of school tours. Because we want to catch our students, our young people, in their element. School is a critical part of their development. And we also have community engagements that we do. And what we are doing is engaging them on the concept of live good, what it means to live good, how can we live good. And a lot of our activities and some of the activities we have sponsored as a ministry is under the banner of live good. So essentially, we are trying to get persons engaged in the concept of what is Jamaican living and what is good Jamaican living, and that is live good. So I have this copy for you, Archibald. I thought it fair to get one for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. So this is a live good campaign, and you're saying, through what you're saying, just talking about Jamaica, as well as the program we spoke about before, I'm hearing a mixture of things. So you're dealing with the problems that are occurring now, but particularly through the Live Good campaign, you're trying to work on ensuring that they don't sort of crop up by re-educating and re-socializing our children as well.
Definitely. We understand that the issue of crime and violence has a law enforcement component, but there must be a behavior change component. And so we treat with the behavior change by addressing vulnerability, as we discussed earlier, but also by, in a general and national type of way, expose, share, and promote a Jamaican ethic of anti-violence, and that is live good. So we're hitting all the angles as best as we can.
No, you said you also wanted to, these are some of the specific programs you do, but there are sort of overarching matters, I would say, that continue to be a challenge. And one of them, for instance, is dealing with Jamaica's homicide rate overall. How is the ministry trying to tackle that? That's the thing that even as you do the work on these different kinds of campaigns, continues to make headlines, and sometimes to the extent that people don't even recognize the work that's being done in other spheres or through other programs from the ministry.
Yes, so the issue of crime, let's just say that it is difficult to come to an acceptable level of crime. I don't believe anyone can agree on what that is. But it is something that the ministry continues to drive efforts towards reducing. And that is done through our agencies, our law enforcement, and through the different reforms that we pursue. So what we've done is modernize law enforcement. We've ensured that they're outfitted to respond well, as best as possible, to the issues of crime. We've improved their investigative capacity through Jamaica Eye and expanding the fleet of vehicles that they have. So they're now much more responsive to the issues of crime. But not only that, we've also built more police stations. We've built about 5 in the last couple of years. We have 2 that have started in just this financial year, and we have some more to come. We're also expanding our forensic capabilities by the introduction of the forensic pathology autopsy suite. And not only that, when we look at the work that we're doing in the community, if we can discourage persons from participating in crime, then that will be valuable. I'm saying all of that and it sounds like theory, but when you start to look now at the gains, Jamaica in the last the last calendar year, I should say, we saw an 8% reduction in homicide. But then when we looked at this particular calendar year, between January and April of this financial year, there was a 15% reduction in homicides. So we had a reduction last year, and now we have a double-digit reduction on where we were last year. So we are continuing to drive them down. It's a critical factor in our development, and so this is something we hope to sustain. This type of change, this type of development.
And you're talking about countless lives here. So it's percentage
from
a statistical perspective, but one life. 15%, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And can you imagine?
And impact beyond that as well.
And exactly, because we understand that sometimes crime has a nuance of retaliatory culture. And if there is no, we can see that we're stemming a cycle as well of violence.
No,
critical.
Earlier I asked you about how you ensure collaboration between different ministries, and you gave me a little insight there. First time I was ever hearing that, so I feel very lucky. But overall, you have all of these programs, because, by the way, those are just some of the programs that you mentioned.
Only some.
And the ministry is more than the ministry. The ministry also has agencies that work with the ministry as well.
10 portfolio entities.
So you have 10 portfolio entities, a ministry full of people, a whole lot of programs. How do you hold all of this together and monitor? What's your mechanism for ensuring that Live Good works well, of paying attention so that Live Good works well, Jamaica I works well? How are you monitoring all of this? How are you performing? How are you performance management again?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, you just have to have good arrangements in place, accountability arrangements. Every single program that the ministry pursues has, I'd want to say, an accountability person in place. There's somebody responsible. So as a strategic planner, I must have my ears on the ground, as it were. I must be conscious of who the accountable individuals are. And then we have regular intervals with which persons would have to report and let us know what's happening. It's a part of the idea of building strong institutions. At the ministry level, we must have good mechanisms in place to track how we're performing. Our permanent secretary, as the accounting officer, has sight of everything that is going on. And perhaps that's not the easiest thing to do, but maybe that's why she's the permanent secretary. But we try our best to support those functions by making sure that we hold persons accountable and identify what the information needs are and when they're needed, and then we can give insight as to how we can move forward.
Let's talk about let's end by talking about the roles and the partnerships that are necessary to achieve this. And I want to go back to the big trip that I talked about at the beginning. So your strategic plan, even in national security, is a plan for every national, but it's a plan that involves a range of people. So you can't go on the big trip and some people show up late, late for the car,
absolutely,
etc. So in terms of the partnerships that are required to get these things ahead and to get them going, partners at different levels, what kind of help does the ministry need, first of all, from like international development partners? What kind of role can they play in helping us ensure that, you know, we achieve these goals that we're setting out?
Well, particularly to our international development partners, can I say that the ministry enjoys a great relationship with IDPs across the world. Right? And I would want to list them, but there are so many, and I do not want to offend, right? But we enjoy funding support, but not only that, they provide technical support in areas of especially community development and community renewal that may not be a skill set that is enjoyed here locally. And so they bring technical support in addition to funding for the strategies that we implement. And it's critical to note as well that our IDPs don't simply insist upon a direction. They work collaboratively with the government to ensure that the direction we're going is feasible and best fits the developmental needs of Jamaica. We could go a little further, if you permit me. Sure. Civil society and private sector, critical partners as well. And I would also use this opportunity to just encourage them to continue to provide that support. We have programs like We Transform, which enjoys a lot of private sector support. And we want that to continue because our youth offenders, they need the support. We need mentors from civil society to come in and help our young people. Those of us who are vulnerable and need a mentor, guiding hand, somebody to empower and encourage, because it's different from what they're hearing in their communities. Yes. We need civil society to come in and lend a hand as well. And critically, Archibald, we have to appreciate that the issue of crime is not going to be resolved by having a lot of police. It has to start by each individual deciding that we are going to take hold of our country. So
there's a role for me. There's a role for everybody in your communities.
There's a role for all of us. We must also advocate as best as we can for best practices, for safety, for security in our spaces. So wherever we are, let us live good. And I believe that as we all collectively live good, our country will be better.
I think that is an absolutely beautiful point on which to end. And you took me straight back to the trip, going on the journey. And the journey just doesn't involve the driver, but involves every individual, including the passengers. And at the end of the day, this is our trip. This is our journey towards having a safer society, a safer Jamaican society, a sustainably safer society. And each of us has a role to play in that. Thank you so much, Mr. Andre Cowan. He is Director of Strategic Planning and Performance Management at the Ministry of National Security. And as always, If you want to find out how you can participate, how you can take part, what role you can play as individuals, as members of civil society, as members of the private sector, you can get information on the Ministry of National Security's webpage and social media pages, but you can also get information on the Planning Institute of Jamaica's webpage and social media pages. Remember, it's all about partnerships. It's all about doing what's necessary to, planning together and doing what's necessary to achieve that plan. Thank you so much for joining us for this another episode of Let's Talk Goals. I'm Archibald Gordon. See you next time.